the wake of so many tragedies, we hear constant demands to do something. Democrats usually demand more gun control. Republicans usually demand fixes to the mental health system. Some law enforcement experts say actually very little can be done to stop someone who is hell-bent on killing innocent people. But I'm here to tell you, there is something we can do immediately. We can actually use our existing background check system. As was horrifically the case in Texas, and as is too often the case elsewhere, it turns out our national instant criminal background check system is not being used as it was intended. Let me explain what NICS system does. As you probably know, before anyone can purchase a firearm, federally licensed retailers are required to run a background check through an FBI database called NICS. The NICS system then alerts retailers to anything that might prohibit the potential buyer from owning a firearm, including mental health issues, a criminal record, domestic violence, a history of drug abuse. The Texas killer should have been in that system due to any number of his issues, from being involuntarily committed to a mental facility to his conviction for domestic abuse. However, although he was convicted in a military court of assault, the Pentagon failed to submit those records to the NICS database, and ultimately, he was allowed to purchase the firearms used to carry out the attack. This is not just a failure of the Pentagon. Many states also failed to submit these records to the NICS system. At the end of 2012, 19 states had submitted fewer than 100 records into the NICS system, and 12 of those states had submitted fewer than 10. So how do we fix this? Well, the 10th Amendment, as I said earlier, to the Constitution prohibits the federal government from mandating states to send their records to NICS. There is, however, an effort to shore up the system. It's called Fix NICS, and it has successfully campaigned for legislation in a number of states, incentivizing them to submit every record to NICS. Since it began in 2013, the number of disqualifying mental health records submitted to NICS increased by 170%. So great, where do I sign up, you ask? Well, you might be surprised to learn who spearheaded the Fix NICS program. It's the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the organization that represents gun manufacturers, retailers, and ranges. Joining me now is Senior Vice President of NSSF, Larry Keene. Larry, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having us, Essie. It's a pleasure.
So sadly, the Texas shooter is not the first high-profile case where the information we critically needed to maybe stop him was not shared. Talk about some of the others that helped catalyze this Fix NICS program.
Well, sadly, there's been many examples where this takes place, where because the states don't put the records in, sometimes because of state laws prohibit sharing the information. So one example, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, there was an individual who acquired a firearm even though he was seriously mentally ill, and then shot and killed several people. And the records did not follow him when he purchased the firearm. So another example is the Washington Navy Yard.
Yeah. The
individual is seriously mentally ill. Was able to purchase a firearm at retail in Virginia and pass a background check. He had been in Rhode Island just before this incident, was completely delusional, hearing voices, was taken to a hospital. He wasn't involuntarily committed, but even had he been involuntarily committed, Rhode Island at the time did not report any records into the NICS system from people who were involuntarily committed. So even if he had been, he would have gone back.
Why bother having a database?
Right, he would have gone back and purchased the firearm in Virginia in retail. We were actually working the Fix NICS issue in Rhode Island at the time. The legislature said, let's go study this. We pointed out exactly what happened, and within 24 hours, Rhode Island changed the law, and now they put their records in.
So help educate me, because I know about the states issue, because I've been following this for some time, and I know you. When it comes to the Pentagon now, why isn't there an automatic, and maybe there is, you can tell me, why isn't there an automatic trigger when someone within the armed services is adjudicated of a crime and convicted? Why doesn't that automatically kick over to NICS?
Well, it certainly ought to,
right,
and maybe it should, and clearly there was a systemic breakdown on the part of DOD. This was not an isolated incident. This was not just the Air Force. This is across the board. The entire Pentagon just failed to...
These clerical errors?
This is not a clerical. This is systemic. This isn't,
wow,
oh, I forgot to do this. So it absolutely should. We're calling upon the Department of Defense, the Government Accounting Office, to conduct an investigation to find out why this happened, what needs to be done so it never happens again. And so, as you say, the records are automatically put in that makes somebody a disqualifying person. There's no excuse for this. This tragedy didn't have to happen, shouldn't have happened if people had done their job.
Yeah. Well, and going back to the states, not every state participates in fixing. Why not? What's the barrier?
So the 10th Amendment, as you mentioned, the Supreme Court has said the 10th Amendment cannot force, the federal government can't force the states to do this. But as we supported the National Instant Criminal Background Check Improvement Act of 2007, it never got fully funded. But, you know, the federal government can use the carrot and stick approach, just like they did with highway dollars and lowering the drunk driving threshold. If states didn't lower the drunk driving threshold, they would not get the highway dollars from the federal government. They should do the same thing with federal DOJ grants to the states. If you don't put the records in, you don't get grant funding from the Department of Justice. So use the carrot and stick, which is perfectly permissible and constitutional. We need to get the states to you know, change their laws.
Right.
We've had tremendous success, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, it's been incredibly successful.
Right, incredibly successful. The industry is very proud of this. And the reason this is important to the industry is retailers are on the front lines. They rely upon this database to be accurate so they don't sell guns to prohibited persons. And you know, so they're relying upon the database to be accurate, and when it's not, it's a problem, which is why the industry is leading this effort. You hear gun control groups talk about it, but it's actually the firearms industry, through our Fix NICS initiative, has changed the law in 16 states and increased the records by almost 3 million and 170% in just a few years. And we're continuing to work on the project until we get every state to be reporting all of their records.
Well, and just real quick, when you hear someone say we must act, how big a difference would this make if every state reported every record every time?
And there's no reason not to, as one of your guests mentioned. You know, this is the, 2017. There's no reason this can't be completely automated. And so there doesn't take any person to sit there and data entry. This should just happen automatically.
Larry Keane, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for keeping us posted on this. It's really important work.